Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we continue our discussion around the cybersecurity essentials for business users. This is session 4. If you've missed any of the previous ones, please feel free to go back and watch the recordings, and hopefully it helps to educate you a little bit more about the role that cybersecurity plays and what your contribution to that within your business is. So we start off every one of our presentations just sharing what our brand commitment is. And this is just a quick statement that is meant to express to our clients what makes us unique and how we believe technology can play a role in building better businesses. We believe very strongly that technology is a tool to help you achieve business goals, overcome business challenges, and that no two strategies are the same. Now, because we're talking about cybersecurity, I just want to introduce really quickly the NIST cybersecurity framework. This, along with the next slide, is going to help you understand a little bit about how we're classifying cybersecurity activities. What I really like about NIST is when you look at it, we see in the middle, detect is kind of the neutral ground. And to the left, we have proactive activities. To the right, we have reactive activities. The reason that it's laid out this way is that when we're running a scan and we detect a vulnerability, we can proactively apply security controls against that. However, if we run a detection and we discover an active threat, then we would be moving to the reactive side. So obviously, our goal as IT professionals and as business leaders would be to be proactive. We want to avoid using the respond and recover portions of the NIST framework. The other part that we're going to talk a lot about is the CIS controls. You'll see in the fine text here, it's a group of 18 categories, which encompasses 153 different safeguards that are recommended by CIS, which is a IT security think tank. The nice thing is that they've taken and broken them up into what they call implementation groups. And we'll see that implementation group 1 has 56 recommendations in it. So if you just want to take care of, the low-hanging fruit, we'll call it, the basic cyber hygiene, you would want to go through and make sure you have as many of the 56 as possible. If you're a little bit more mature, they talk in here about maybe you're working with a managed service provider like us, the expectation would be that you've gotten through implementation group 1 and you're working on the 74 items in implementation group 2. And if you had your own internal IT department, or you had compliance requirements, you were more advanced, you had a lot of intellectual property, you might be looking then at implementation group 3, which would be the last 23. So each layer builds on the one before it. We've already gone through the first 10 CIS controls. Number 11 is data recovery. Now, this one here is about recognizing that the ability to restore information or to recover after an incident is very important. So in implementation group 1, we see that there's 4 out of the 5 controls within this. And, I think anybody that's watching this probably recognizes that the information that's stored on your computer is the thing that's of value. And so you want to have what we call a 3-2-1 backup in place, which means you need 3 copies of your data on 2 separate mediums. No, I'm losing my total train of thought here. Yeah, 3 copies of data, 2 separate mediums, 1 being offsite. You'll also notice in the 5 safeguards in this category, 4 of them are on the reactive side. So meaning you would only use them in the case that you needed to recover from an incident. That being said, you have to have them in place before the incident to be able to recover from them. So number 1, establish and maintain a data recovery process. who has access to it, where is it stored, how do we recover to make sure we're not overwriting existing information. Number two, performing automated backups. Believe it or not, this is still one of those things when I go and meet with a new prospect or potential new client, I often find out that they are sticking a USB stick into a computer or a server, copying data, and relying on a human led backup strategy. It's got to be automated. Protecting recovery data it also goes with number three, protecting it, and number four, about keeping it isolated. One of the best ways to protect your recovery data is by having it isolated and offsite. So those are the four that Implementation Group 1 covers. Implementation Group 2 is the only additional one, which is number 5, testing the recovery data. We've said it for years, your backup is only as good as your ability to restore from it. And so you want to make sure that on a periodic basis that you're going in and testing that through a simulated recovery. It's probably the best way to put it. Number 12. So network infrastructure management, there's 8 safeguards in here. And this one is the opposite of the last one in that most of the controls are coming in group 2 and 3. And this starts to get, I think, a lot more complex. And actually, I was on another cloud security discussion or cybersecurity discussion yesterday. And the things that fall into this category are, I think, often what the news or the media or the movies make cyber attacks look like, where they're coming from, where it's people that are trying to brute force their way into networks, bypassing firewalls and doing all those types of things. And in the reality is that most threats come from incorrect deployment of software and those types of things. You got to love when you do a demo and you realize that Implementation Group 1 on the right-hand side of the screen says there's 1 item, and then in the left, we have 2 items that have green dots in them. The other thing that's different on this one compared to the last control is we'll notice that most of the categories on these are in the protect and identify category, meaning they are proactive activities. So first one, ensuring your network infrastructure is up to date. You got to have firewalls and switches and wireless access points that are current. And the reason that this is important is that equipment that is current and under support from the manufacturer, they receive patches and security updates that old, outdated equipment would not be receiving. Number 2, establish and maintain secure network architecture. I think a lot of people don't realize how much control a network switch has, and the ability to set up administrative accounts and segmenting networks into different components plays a big part in isolating traffic and ultimately protecting the information on it. Number 3, we'll talk about as well because it has the green dot on it, being Implementation Group 1. I'll have to look and see where it actually lands. But securely manage network infrastructure. So what this is talking about is, again, when we put these devices in, even though it just seems like something that connects network cables together, there are control elements to it. It has a processor, it has software, it has settings that need to be dialed in a way to restrict access to only the people that should be able to get to it. The rest of them, as we mentioned, they're in Implementation Group 2 and 3, a little bit more advanced, so we won't go into great detail on those. Control number 13, network monitoring and defense. I can't wait to see if my green dots match to the numbers here, but we see Implementation Group 1 has 0 listed on it. And so this one is all about monitoring all of those network devices by collecting logs from them, assessing the outcomes of those logs or the information that's held within them, setting up all kinds of rules around things that we would call VLANs and isolation and quality of service and much more advanced network management than what the typical small medium business would require or have the resources to put in place. When you get down into the lower ones there for the implementation group 3 items, this is where we start seeing attack simulations, network intrusion, alerts and those types of things, which again, for the typical small and medium business, you're less likely to face an attack or an incident based on these types of exploits. If you were a bank or a hospital or something like that, where you're a pretty interesting target that someone would specifically go after, that's why you're going to see most of these are implementation group 2 and 3 items. But this one, security awareness and skills training, is all about the people. Now, we recognize that every single computer, if it's just sitting on a desk, it doesn't do anything until somebody sits in front of it and starts navigating through it. With the shift from working from home, there's a lot more information that is outside of the traditional, office environment. And so we need to recognize that all of the technology in the world is not going to protect us if we have users who unwittingly, expose the data, to risk. So quite a few items fall in implementation group 1. And for anybody on the call who has had to fill out a cyber insurance application, you'll notice that your insurer is going to start asking for many of these types of trainings and protections. So the first one, establishing and maintaining a security awareness program. So this is something that has developed significantly over the last couple of years. You want to have something that is regularly occurring, that can be monitored, meaning who has taken it, who hasn't, that you can report back to your insurance provider what your compliance rate is, and you really just need to make sure that people get it done. Number 2, training your workforce to recognize social engineering attacks. This is something that I talk about a lot, is that people don't realize how much information they're putting out on social media, that they share with people through, email, autoresponders. And it's even things like how people answer the phone. We've seen attempted attacks where, people will somehow know where the director of operations for a company is on holidays, and the controller is getting phone calls or emails supposedly from that person. These are very targeted, to the point that people are, calling businesses to find out who's in the office and who's on holidays and those types of things. So you need to really think about how you're training your people around not just technology, but also engaging with people when they're asking questions. Training workforce members on authentication best practices. So understanding that any application where you have a username and a password, what are the standards around passwords? What are the standards around multi-factor authentication? Why is it important? Again, I think a lot of people don't realize the power that you have when you can control someone's email. And people are a little bit too cavalier with sharing those things or reusing passwords across multiple sites. So you want to train them on it, and then you want to move to enforce those standards or those policies where you can. Number 4, training your workforce on data handling best practices. It's unfortunate that people make mistakes. They email spreadsheets with sensitive information. They create folders that they share that people have access to that they shouldn't. Again, it's in the name of improving collaboration, let's say, but they're not realizing that once that information goes out into the world, regaining control of it is either impossible or incredibly difficult. So you really want them to think hard before they share a folder or share a link with other people. Number 5, training your workforce members on causes of unintentional data exposure. So this goes, I think, back to number 1, cybersecurity awareness training and that awareness of what you're sending. You know, it's unfortunate when we get one of those calls, you know, the example that I gave of inadvertently sending an email. We've had that where, you know, somebody has accidentally sent an email that included everybody's pay information, you know, to somebody that shouldn't have it. And again, it's very difficult to get that back. So if you have an email that has sensitive information, you know, before you click send, make sure you've double checked, you know, who you're sending it to, what information they need, and if that's the best way to share it with them. Because maybe the best way is to have a Teams meeting and share your screen rather than, you know, sending them the actual document. Number 6, training your workforce on recognizing and reporting security incidents. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't report because they're afraid that they will be punished. And that non-disclosure or non-reporting can potentially open your business to more, like a bigger incident, more data leakage, or it could stop you from taking the actions necessary to, you know, kind of contain that situation. So you need to have a bit of a safe place where people are able to do that, and make sure that you're able to look into those when they come in. Number 7, how to identify and report if their enterprise assets are missing security updates. So this is an interesting one because more often than not, this is left up to the IT team. And I think if you are in the role of managing IT, you don't so much want people, you know, poking around on these things on their own. What you want is you want to be able to get good, accurate reporting from your IT provider about the status of your updates. And you want to understand why certain updates may or may not be applied. Because contrary to this, the best practice is not always to apply every update as it's available. Number 8, training your workforce on the dangers of connecting to and transmitting enterprise data over insecure networks. This is an interesting one because you're going to hear, I mean, you can go online, you can read lots of articles about the risks of connecting to, you know, Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or in an airport or in a hotel. And it is legitimate that there is potential for, you know, risk from this. But it's also, you know, very difficult to avoid if your workforce is distributed or if they travel. That being said, most people carry a cellular phone that they could put into a hotspot and create their own, you know, private network. There's also opportunities to use things like VPNs. And I mean, if you're in legitimate businesses, your risk is much lower. So if I was in a large chain coffee shop, I wouldn't feel that concerned about connecting to their Wi-Fi. However, if I was in a, you know, independent coffee shop, when I opened the Wi-Fi up, if I noticed multiple networks that were available and unsecured, I might question that a little bit more. And then the last one we'll touch on, because it's only one item out of number 2, which is conducting role-specific security awareness and skills training. I mean, the reality is that somebody in sales has a different level of access and awareness to the confidential information to somebody in engineering. So they should have different levels of training and awareness around cybersecurity. Service provider management. Another one that you'll notice, implementation group 1 only has a single implementation or single standard. And this is about recognizing that, you know, as a business, you are going to be choosing whose products you use. And you need to, I guess, vet them and consider what are they doing to protect themselves and by extension, protect you? So like many of these, the very first item on here is to have an inventory of your service providers, meaning knowing who they are. When you get down into, the further ones, they start getting into having an actual policy around how you choose service providers. As an example, in our business, if we're looking at, two competing, solutions, if one of them does not include multi-factor authentication as a security option, it does not make it to our short list, right? We also have considerations around how well does it integrate with our other tools, because we don't want a whole bunch of, disparate systems that don't talk to each other. We want to tie these things together. So as you go through, you'll see that, in the implementation group 2, it's again about asking questions, understanding how they're protecting themselves. And then when you get in implementation group 3, they make a point of really making sure that you are consistently communicating with, even to the point of monitoring them, and making sure that when you choose to stop doing business with someone, you actually disable all access, remove information, and all of that. Application software security. Isn't this one interesting that in implementation group 1, we show that there are 0 out of 14. And that's because the likelihood of experiencing an incident from this is probably, it's not that it's lower, but it's much more difficult to manage. Because when we talk about application softwares, we're talking about all of the programs that are installed on all of the computers that you have. So if you have a business of 20 computers and we exported a list of all of the software, there are legitimately hundreds of programs. Now you may have similar programs across them, but Adobe Acrobat version 9, and version 8 and version, whatever the new ones are, those are 3 different applications that need to be managed differently. And so the reason that these are mostly implementation group 2 and 3 is that the typical small medium business that doesn't have the tools available to them, like what a managed service provider has, quite frankly, cannot inventory, monitor, manage across all of their workstations. So that's what these are all about. It's about, first of all, making sure you know what software you have, what software is approved, creating lists of software that you outright are not going to allow on your network, making sure that you have a process for monitoring them, for patching them, for updating them. And then the later ones are very much about software developers and how you are building applications, which of course for most people, most businesses, isn't a big part of what we do. Number 17, incident response management. So if you recall from the NIST framework, this is very much a reactive component of the CIS controls. But the idea is that you want to have a plan about how you will respond to a cyber incident. And this brings in all different areas of the business. The way that we've done it in the past is we lock ourselves in the boardroom for an afternoon and we say, what if? What if you came in and your servers were completely non-responsive, you could not access your data? Well, number 1, designate personnel to manage the incident handling. Who's in charge of that? Who is, number 2, contact information for reporting. Who are we going to talk to? Do we talk to our lawyers first? Do we talk to our insurance first? Do we talk to our IT provider first? It's really important to understand the sequence of events and how they should be done, who should be doing them, and when to get other parties involved. Number 3, establish and maintain an enterprise process for reporting incidents. So this one is particularly important, and one that you should have a conversation with your cyber insurance provider, and if you happen to have a lawyer, understanding ahead of time in what circumstances do you have to report an incident, because in Canada we do have mandatory breach reporting when personally identifiable information is compromised. So you need to understand when you need to report it, then you need to find out how to report it, what to say, and again, who should be doing all that. A big part of what we've learned in incident response planning is that there are very clear lines that you don't want to cross to help lower your exposure to additional liability and things down the road. So highly recommend you take a look at least identifying who should be involved in your incident response team, who are your key outside contacts, and how and in what circumstances would you have to engage your end users and your clients to notify them of an incident that may have occurred. Number 18, again, 0 out of 5 in implementation group 1, penetration testing. So penetration testing is using tools and processes and systems to simulate an attack on your network, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for open ports, trying to find your way into the network with the mindset of an attacker. Now, of course, the goal with this is to find those weak spots in your network before they get exploited, so that you can work to close them. Again, we notice that it's all implementation group 2 and implementation group 3 because this is pretty advanced, right? Most businesses, again, these are targeted attacks that come into these things, but they do have recommendations for them, and it's something that can be done as your cybersecurity approach matures. Whew. All right. So of course, Tier 3 IT Solutions, we take cybersecurity very seriously. We have a team of people that are dedicated to working with clients to, measure where they're at in the implementation of these controls. We have specifically designed an entire series of assessments and benchmarks and tests that we do on our clients' networks with the goal of helping them to measure their cybersecurity posture and to improve over time. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of this whole series, cybersecurity is a journey and not a destination, right? You will never be 100% cyber secure. You have to continuously review and adapt and improve. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this session. We're going to pick up again in a couple of weeks. And the next portion of this series is going to be a little bit more, targeted around the typical small, medium business. And again, we appreciate you tuning in. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon. All right.